Yo,
Yo,
hello. I hope you're having a good day. So
I'm
you
not.
mentioned that. Oh, all right. Well, you mentioned that we're using algorithms, right, to allocate labor and whatnot. I'm curious, like, what algorithm specifically are you referring to? Because to my knowledge, there's not an algorithm that we have that can really do that.
Claude Mythos.
Well,
Look it up.
the AI. Remember, these are all have price signals that exist, right? Because we're in a capitalist society, so they can use price signals as data points, right? Whereas in a communist society, you
What is
wouldn't
the
have
price?
a price. It's what you paid for exchanging goods.
Okay, what is it that you pay?
Money.
What's money?
It's a notation of value,
How is that value measured?
subjectively.
Really?
Yeah, subjective theory of value.
Okay, you think the value of a dollar is subjectively measured?
Are you talking about? Oh, we're talking about the dollar of the value of a dollar, not the value itself. No. Yeah, but the value it
Okay, well,
betrays is
the dollar
subjective.
is the repository of value that we have now that you're talking about, that we use
Yeah, but that
to.
value in itself is subjective, right?
How is it
Like
subjective when it's
the goods
determined
you
by
pay, right?
central bank established interest rates
Yeah,
plus.
but then that what the dollar is actually worth for in goods is subjective, right? So if you have a dollar in a
No, it's
society,
absolutely not.
yeah.
It's
So if you live
absolutely not. It's based on objective considerations like costs of production.
Yeah, right. But then that the value itself, right? I'm talking about the price you have to pay with dollars. That value, then the value of $1 being $1, sure, yeah, but the actual value of then, right?
No, the value of any given thing, the cost of production is absolutely a factor.
Yeah, sure, it's a factor, but it's not the deciding factor, right? If you spend hours producing
It's pretty
something,
based on a society driven by market competition. It's absolutely the basically the determining
well,
factor.
wait, are we talking about like the theory of value itself, or you're just talking about the value of a
Don't worry
dollar?
about theories. Let's talk about common sense, okay? Because of market competition, you do have a lot of luxury brands that are upmarked based on their cost of production. Absolutely, I don't disagree
Yeah,
with
but
that.
also you have to account for it's not
But
simply production cost, right? You have to take into account incentives, right? Like it's pretty simple if you want to go to common sense, right? You can't overcharge. You'd agree
okay,
with that.
listen, attempting to disagree with the labor theory of value is just psychosis. It comes from
It's
classical
not.
political economy. Marx didn't invent it. It's the
Yeah,
only
yeah,
thing that makes
classical,
sense.
but yeah, yeah, obviously, yeah, Ricardo, yeah, all those guys made it, but now it's common consensus that we usually go with subjective theory of value, right?
Yeah, that's
As
just
well, because
nonsense. It's just
well,
total
no, because
nonsense.
you agree that marginal utility is not homogeneous, right?
What do you mean by that?
So marginal utility is different from person to person, right? If you someone's marginal utility is different from each person.
That doesn't matter. Production is
It
still
does
social.
matter.
Production is
No,
still
no,
socialized. Production is
no.
still
This is the
socialized,
whole.
and there remains a division of labor.
No, this is not what I'm saying, right? So if marginal
Do you think
utility,
production is modulated to the whims and fancies of every single individual? Part of the factors and consideration of an individual's choices and whims and fancies is what's available to them in the first place, which is absolutely determined socially based on social factors of the degree of socialization, the degree of mechanization,
yeah, but
technological ability to actually produce commodities, and so on and so on. You make it as though that our economy is simply tailored around making every individual's specific desires and dreams materialize and realize. That's not true, and it's never been
that's not
true.
what I'm saying. I'm arguing that because our demands are naturally non-objective, right? We have a subjective look on the world, right? Then value is then also subjective. Right? There's no objective value.
You no, you
You can't
couldn't
base
say
off
that.
the
You can't say that they're pure. They're even primarily subjective. Actually, that doesn't make any sense because at a certain point, the relative historical and cultural and so on, which you're reducing to subjective, which is wrong, by the way, because subjective means the whims and fancies of an individual. That's not true.
yeah. Our,
You mean to
our
tell me
wants
that
are.
people find Nike and Disney all because they somehow have decided subjectively that they like it? No, they're going with social trends and culture. It's all
Yeah,
culturally
but
determined.
they
But in
subjectively
any
enjoy.
case, the relative historical demands and use values that are produced within any given historical epoch, we can we can concede that yes, those are historically produced and societally relative. Some societies, it's more common to like ice cream than whatever. Yeah, these are cultural trends, primarily culturally driven trends, and we can relativize them. They're not they're not given to us strictly by nature. We're not animals. I agree,
Yeah,
culture exists, but on the other hand, once we presuppose these use values, which are socially necessary and socially determined, how they are produced, how they come into being materially, then becomes the determining and deciding factor as far as how the law of value is expressing
yeah,
itself.
I understand. I understand. But like, if we go back, I'm just addressing your first point, right? So we didn't choose Disney, right? Yes, that's true. We never created with this idea of using Disney, right? But our subjective views make us choose between, I don't know, Disney, Netflix, all these other streaming services, right? We subjectively value each one higher because of our taste in movies. And while sure, that could be influenced.
But look, Disney and Netflix, for example, regardless of which one is being selected as more socially necessary and how that's aggregated, eventually becomes socially and a social aggregate that's measured in a quantifiable way, like 30% like this, 40% like this, whatever.
Yeah, but that's after the fact.
That
You're
doesn't
not
change the
pre-measuring.
material presuppositions of the conditions of those things.
It does though,
existing.
because that's
It
a
doesn't change their
post-analysis.
conditions of production. How does it change their conditions of production? Like Disney, for example, probably has the same conditions of production as a Universal Studios or something, right? So
Yeah, but the content, the way they, the content they produce is different, and the efficiency in which they
not
produce it is different.
materially. It's really not necessarily Apple, Android. It's kind of infinitesimal differences at a
Yeah,
material
but it's a
level.
different product, right? Undisputable.
Look, the product is different and distinct in an infinitesimal sense relative to the actual material conditions of their production. So, yeah, I mean, let's say people want a pink iPhone versus a blue one. Is pink different from blue? Yes. But is the cost of pink all that different from the cost of blue? Is the process of dyeing it blue all that different from dyeing it pink? Not really.
No, but you just proved my point. It's subjectively valued higher.
Yeah, but subjectivity, first of all, don't call it subjective, call it cultural. Second of all, that determination doesn't tell us anything about the material conditions of its production. It just tells us that society has deemed this socially necessary.
You said that they were the same production, right? It's just different color.
Okay, look.
That
Society
is subjectively viewed higher.
Okay. They're only different to the
Societally
extent
viewed higher. Okay, societally viewed higher.
whether society has determined it to be socially necessary or not is irrelevant to the fact of whether or not, or it doesn't tell us anything about what the material conditions of its production are. It just tells us society has regards it as socially necessary. So once we presuppose that it's socially necessary, now we have to ask the question of the material conditions of production. Okay, so we go from step 1 to step 2. You say we can never leave step 1. I disagree. Ricardo disagreed. So did the entirety of classical political economy.
The classical, sure, but that was a long time ago, right? Since then, we've had a lot of
the idea that they never thought of it in their head that people have different preferences is a mockery of European history.
That's not an actual.
thought.
You're just that's not.
The
an
idea
actual
that they
debate.
never thought of the possibility that some people like
It's just
apples
appeal
and
to
others
authority.
and others
You're
like
appealing to
oranges. No, it's just stupid. Like you don't
No,
think
you're
these
appealing
people
to
that devoted
authority.
their entire. You don't think Adam Smith
This is appeal to it. Logical
okay,
fallacy,
then I'm going to
dude.
make the appeal to authority. Adam Smith, devoting his entire life to the study
This
of
is a
political
logical fallacy.
economy, never
Logical
thought in
fallacy.
his head that some people like apples and others like oranges. Do you think that it was that shallow and less?
For
Do
thousands
you
of
think,
years,
the
it's-
French physiocrats and the entire school of European political economy that lasted centuries, so much scholarships? You think they never thought of it that some people like apples and others like oranges? Like this was just so
You're
like
spamming
this
a
is
logical-
such a
this is a logical
groundbreaking
fallacy.
argument they could have never considered. Give them a little more. No. Give them a little more charity and rationally
I do.
put rationally
But I'm an
piece
Austrian school economist.
rationally piece together in your head the likelihood that they never considered that.
Yeah.
And once you can accept that they, in all probability, they did consider that, go and read and try to find out what their response to that actually was,
I
and
haven't
save yourself
read?
a lot of time.
Because they haven't. Also, they are in completely different conditions, right? We have much more.
No, listen. There's nothing about differing conditions that would have made it impossible for people to conclude that there are different preferences, okay, when it comes to economic uses.
This is just
The idea
appeal
this
to
is a
new
new argument,
combat my
the
claim. You're just
idea
saying,
that this was a new argument to classical political economy is a consequence of the
It's a logical
historical
fallacy.
and theoretical and philosophical amnesia that is inevitably created by the capitalist division of labor, which isolates people and blinds them and gives them an amnesia with respect to entire fields of inquiry and schools of thought, so that Austrians could wake up one day and pretend nobody's ever thought of this ever, and they're the first person ever to think of this. But in reality, every argument an Austrian has ever made was preempted by some French guy 400 years earlier who
You're
actually
not giving
already
me an
thought of that.
argument. You're just saying, oh, Ricardo thought of it, so it must be true. That's
No,
not an
I'm
argument.
just telling you it's I'm just
That's
telling
appeal to authority.
the
You're appealing
subjective
to
theory of
authority.
value is a kind of like step one when the entire classical field of political economy was a step two, a three, a four. You've never passed the first step. There's no contradiction between the fact that values are also also have to be socially necessary and the notion that they could also be objective. There's no contradiction between those at all. That
So
something
they are
is socially
subjective to
necessary.
societal whims, but they are
that a
objective.
condition of something having value, that it's socially necessary, doesn't change whether that value can be referred to as objective or not at all. You don't even get to step one.
Well, so you're saying it's subjective to the societal norms, yet it's still objective.
Yes,
contradiction.
because the
That's a key
objectivity
enough.
refers to material conditions of production. Socially necessary maybe is one of those conditions. It's a premise that those conditions are affected, that this is going to be produced materially, okay? But once we accept that, we have to inquire upon the material conditions of its production and whether that factors into the value that's manifested in markets and so on in an exchange, which it absolutely is, as a determining factor. An implicit presupposition in the constraint of value is that it's socially necessary. But that it is socially necessary is not enough for us to understand the discrepancies in the prices of magnitudes of value of various different commodities. That was the point. The diversity of magnitudes of the various commodities cannot solely be explained by the fact that they're socially necessary.
But yeah, you're still arguing though that like societal demands move as a whole, right? But in reality, that's not true.
I'm not even saying that. I'm just saying it's socially necessary. Whether that's the aggregate of all these completely isolated individual tastes, just aggregating into these social trends. We can ignore that naive, stupid view you have of how trends form. That's fine. But all that's, in Marxist language, that's just socially necessary. That's all it means. The fact that there's demand for it, the fact that people want it, the fact that they decided it's valuable.
How do you quantify that?
We don't need to
like
quantify
as a Marxist.
it.
Well, you'd have to quantify it to put it in some sort of model to allocate
We don't need to
resources.
we can just assume it. We don't have to quantify it at all.
So you base your economy off assuming things. Like how, but you have to
No,
quantify it
we
somehow.
say that the fact that it's socially necessary is a implicit premise of anything having value at all, speaking of value, and then we inquire upon how things actually acquire the magnitudes of value that they do.
Okay, but to run it through these algorithms in which you speak of, you need to quantify it some way.
Okay,
right?
what is the price of a piece of poop to someone who doesn't want it at all?
$0.
$0, correct. So we're not even talking about poop if no one wants it. We're not even talking about it.
Okay.
We don't have to
What's your
talk
point?
about it. There's nothing to... but it can't explain why there's discrepancies in prices when we're already presupposing that this is
That's not what
socially
I'm talking
necessary.
about.
I know it's
I've
not what
said-
you're talking about because you've never thought of this before in your life.
No,
You've never thought about the fact that we can't actually explain any prices in terms of subjective theory of value because if
Yes, we
something
can.
isn't wanted at
You want the
all,
definition?
if something is not wanted at all, it's $0. You can't speak of it in terms of value.
Yeah, it's
not
subjectively worth zero. If someone really liked poo,
it is
worth more.
it is worth $0 because there's no demand for it because it's not being produced. There's no
because
one's
if
producing
someone
it.
what if someone really liked this person's poo? Let's just say, just as an absurd example, right? It would
Okay.
then be valued higher. Would you not agree? They would pay for it.
But does it actually have value?
To them, it does.
No,
They would pay
it
real
doesn't
money for
actually
it.
have value.
No, it does, because they would pay for it.
No, it doesn't, because at a certain scale, market prices acquire a social.
Yeah, at a certain scale. See, this
yeah.
is where it falls off. You look at it too much of a macro movement, right? When in reality, it's a lot more nuanced.
No, the macro reality is objectively real. Okay,
Yeah, you could take it.
Poop.
Taking
If
an
if
average.
one person pays another person for their poop, let's say $35 or something, right? That doesn't mean the poop has the magnitude of value that is worth, that's the equivalent of $35. That's assuming price and value are the same, which they're not, right? If
Yeah.
there's an underlying value to things that's objective, then how that would be explained is that the value produced elsewhere that gives the $35, which would be backed by gold in this scenario because it has to be, the inherent objective magnitude of value that's crystallized in it was actually produced objectively elsewhere and is being squandered to buy this poop to satiate this person's whims and fancies for poop. Right?
Well, once again, you're still saying. Hold on. Let me make sure I understand your argument.
So the fact that people can buy whatever they want doesn't actually negate there's an objective law of value, because the law of value.
Your objectivity is just an average of the subjective.
No, it's not.
individual.
No, it's not.
Yes, that's what you're saying. You're saying the aggregate demand, which would then be just an average of these subjective
Let's
values.
presuppose aggregate demand, which is absolutely not an aggregate of individual preferences, because individual preferences are culturally formed by and large.
But they vary from person to person.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. These are infinitesimal, meaningless differences that don't matter, right?
No.
Yeah, in a tribe where there's an extremely communal division of labor, where one guy likes a bead shaped in some way, it doesn't change the underlying labor that they're going on the beach collecting seashells and beads or whatever. Like the infinitesimal different preferences or whatever, these are not economic factors at all. Okay, but in any case, when we presuppose that something is socially necessary, okay, that doesn't tell us about why there's discrepancies in the magnitudes of value that are crystallized in various different commodities on the market under intense competitive conditions, okay?
So your point still stands that you're just aggregating individual demand for your objective value. So how would you calculate objective value then? Is it just the work time?
No, I'm not aggregating individual demand. First of all, I would explain to you why, because it's not how preferences are formed. They're not formed individually, first of all. No, they're not. No, they're not. Second of all, yeah, you just so happen to have the preferences of someone living in 2026 and not 1592. You're such a unique individual, by the way.
They're slightly different, right? Like
it doesn't matter. That's not even the important part of the argument. It's not even the important part of the argument. I'm saying we could just presuppose that. We could just presuppose that the things that have value are socially necessary. But why are there discrepancies in the price of things? The fact that it's socially necessary can't explain that. The fact that something is wanted more than another doesn't explain it, actually. Only thing that explains it is the objective conditions of productions being different. The conditions of the production of a refrigerator are different than the conditions of the production of a pair of sandals.
Yeah, but once again, if we look at
people who like refrigerators don't necessarily value sandals less than they do refrigerators. For most people to live a well-rounded life, they want both. Both of these things are important to them.
Yeah,
but the conditions of the production of a refrigerator and those of sandals differ. Why?
Okay.
Because the magnitudes of labor crystallized in them are different.
I understand. So now let's look back to your colored phones example, right? Their conditions of production were the exact same, just with color difference. But their values are different, right?
Right.
So
no, their values aren't different. Their prices are different, potentially.
Because people value them, right? Someone would rather pay $10.
No, you're making value some kind of normative concept.
No, because someone values a certain color phone over the other.
Colloquially, they value it more. Correct. Not in the sense of classical political economy. They colloquially think that this one is worth more than the other one. Okay, sure, but ultimately, that in some local sense can explain the discrepancy in the price, but it cannot explain the tendencies within society that are responsible for the possibility of the accumulation of surpluses, and it cannot explain the tendencies that are responsible for the formation of No, it can't.
You're wondering why surpluses accumulate if values are fair? Is that what you're asking?
What a loaded, stupid question. Okay? No, not if they're fair. If you have two iPhones and one of them is upmarked from its cost of production because it's green and the green one is in demand more, and the other one is blue, for example,
Hmm.
there are still objective conditions of the production that basically will guarantee it won't go up below a certain price, right?
Sure. Sure.
Regardless of whether anyone prefers it or not. And I'll tell you
Yeah.
why. Because let's say there's such a low demand for it that Apple or whoever wants to just get it off the shelves and sell it for $1 when the cost of production is $100, right?
Hmm.
Let's pretend that scenario happens, which it could very well. If that trend would continue, Apple would no longer be able to sustain the production of that iPhone anymore. It could not
Okay.
acquire the surplus necessary for the accumulation or expansion of capital, let alone maintain operations, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So that's what it's meant by the objective conditions of production.
So you're saying that because, like, objectively, sometimes people don't want things. That doesn't mean the entire. You're just saying, once again, you're going back to aggregates, right?
Okay.
The aggregate of people
The
doesn't
question
want
is
that,
not,
so
do
it's-
people want things? The question is, once people want things, what are the objective conditions of the production of those things?
Oh, because
Now, if people don't want things to such an extent that the price falls below its cost of production entirely, it's no longer a relevant factor market-wise anymore.
Okay. So how does that make things? There's like an objective sort of maybe overarching
Okay,
structure, but
the
still.
the conditions for the reproduction of the labor that go into the production of a given commodity, okay, let's say a coat or something in Marx's time, though that has to be met and maintained, or else there's not going to be a coat, whether anyone fucking wants one or not. There won't
Yeah.
be one.
Okay.
Okay, so that's
So-
that's what we mean by objective value. We're
now
presupposing the fact it's socially necessary.
All right. Well, let's look at the other factors, right? Because it's not simply that. Also, let's say they marketed this iPhone, right? And that increased sales. How do you factor that into the cost, right?
The increase of sales all only means it's more socially necessary. It doesn't explain to us how the surplus is being produced, is being accumulated. It doesn't matter how many iPhones you sell if they're $1 and the cost of production of an iPhone is $100.
Yeah, no, I'm kind
It
of.
doesn't
rotating.
matter how many you sell. If you're not able to acquire a surplus over the initial cost of production, there's no profit.
Yes, I understand, but
Okay.
I'm talking about because your objective thing of $100. So you say the objective value is how much it takes to produce, right?
Yes.
But though it might take $100 to materially produce it, right? They spend money on research, they spend money on marketing, they spend money on all these things. So how would you combat that? It's your rebuttal.
How do you distinguish the costs of production that are the direct material costs of production, according to a scheme within the labor theory of value, and costs of production that go into furthering the social necessity of the product, or refining it or changing it in some kind of way? Well, it's just that you can divide it between costs of production, which actually Marx talks about in Capital Volume 2 when he talks about commercial workers and commercial production and circulation, right? More or less, marketing is something you're doing to increase the social necessity of this thing, this commodity.
So, okay, rotating back to my original point,
Yeah.
right? All this. So, for the economic calculation problem, right? How do you respond to the economic calculation problem? Like, give me a pitch to someone that knows what the economic calculation problem is and how you combat that.
It's complete bullshit. The burden is not on me to debunk anything. There's nothing to debunk. It's just it was based on faulty premises from the beginning.
No, because how do you So you use objective theory of value, but that doesn't solve for incentives, right? In innovation, there's no innovation.
What are you talking about?
Incentive. There's no. What is the innovation incentive?
But that's totally separate from the calculation problem. There's no relationship.
Okay, well, going back to the calculation problem, right? You said that.
Why are you pivoting?
Okay, hold on. I'll return. So we go to the economic calculation problem. You calculate, just to make sure I understand your point, you calculate using the labor theory of value. That's how you calculate.
Not necessarily, no.
Oh, so what do you calculate with then?
You factor in the input of the hours of labor that are going into the commodity, but you also factor into things like scarcity, productive capacity, and of course demand by society. And
Right, so how do
yeah.
you find that demand?
how do you measure whether people want things? It's really
Yeah.
easy. You can put first of all, I'm just assuming we're living in like the 20s right now. I'm not going to even entertain how easy this would be in 2026. Let's just assume we're living in the 20s, okay? When this stupid idea was advanced, okay? And I'm a Soviet whatever, right? It's very easy to take inventory of what people want versus what they don't want, beyond just what they're taking off the shelves. You could begin with that, of course. What is in more demand based on what are people consuming more? But you could also just listen to people and poll them and through the
You need to
local.
have something like people could just say, "Oh, I want a bunch of shoes. I want a bunch of this." You have to have some sort of like cutoff. Like,
Okay,
that's as much as you get. So how did you do that?
what do you mean cut off?
Well, like, because what's stopping people from just requesting everything? Because, like, sure, I want.
Do you
a
think
PlayStation.
in planned economies everything is just free?
No, but I'm asking you because you said you go off what people want. You'd ask people.
You asked me how could you figure out what
Yes.
demand is, demand input. I never.
Yeah, I mean,
So how are you so stupid that you go from me saying demand is one of the factors of whether or not to consider producing something, and to demand is the only factor, right?
I'm not.
What
But I
are
mean,
we
it's,
talking about here?
you need to have it, right? You need to understand demand in order to produce something.
Okay,
Like,
so if we can understand demand, that means everything is free. Do you even hear
no,
yourself?
no, you're misunderstanding what I'm saying. I asked you how you quantify demand, right? Because you need to know demand for production. And you said we'd ask people, right? So what's stopping people from just requesting as much as they want?
Because people because this is the fascinating thing that the Austrians can never understand is that people's actual demands are not simply determined by their imagination. They're also determined by a relative expectation and understanding of what is available already to them. Right?
Yeah, but
So
how do you don't know like the specifics though, and also it's slightly different from person to person.
you have a very limited imagination. So there's always going to be a constrained, limited initial availability of any given thing that's already there, right? Let's say the given articles of consumption that are just brought over from the capitalist era are now just being reproduced in a socialist way to maintain the standard of living, right? Now, how people express demand is incremental. They slowly and gradually start choosing this over this, right? And then
Hmm.
based on the popularity of there's all sorts of ways to determine whether something is going to be more in demand than another, and then rationally extrapolate the why of why that is. There's all sorts of ways to experiment whether a product would actually be popular and necessary, because what's that saying that Steve Jobs said? You don't just figure out what people already think they want. You give them what they want. You give them something that they didn't even know they wanted, right? And there's all sorts of ways to figure out whether that would be popular, whether that could catch on as a trend. You start slow. I mean, if it works in the village, you scale up. I mean, this is a non-problem.
It's not a non-problem because once again now you're going on to like this wouldn't be an individual executing production, right? You'd have to do this on a government scale. Like think about the
What are you talking
bureaucratic.
about? There's shelves, and there's some things that are taken off the shelves and paid for, and there's other things that remain, and those are absolutely factored into macro scale calculations in the
What sort of
Soviet Union.
calculate? Give me your full formula for how you do this. Like what is your formula for your economic calculation?
What is my full mathematical formula for planning the entire Soviet Union?
No, because you must have one, right? Do you have one?
Okay, to be clear, you
You
want
have
a
one.
mathematical formula right now, right?
Yes.
Okay, goodbye. Literally never come back. Even if I had one on hand, how would I present it to you? Well, am I supposed to write it down on a notebook and show the camera? What a stupid thing to demand of me, a mathematical formula on TikTok. Even if I had a mathematical formula for planning the Soviet Union off the top of my head, why is the burden upon me that I need that? They already had that. They had the top mathematicians in the world, which is why they all went to work for Intel and IBM, and they founded Silicon Valley. Give me your math formula. Yeah, just say it out loud. Oh yeah, I have the Soviet planning. I have it off the top of my head. Sure. What a reasonable thing to demand. An insufferable ANCAP